coming through. Hi everyone, welcome to our fourth webinar in our October series. Time's certainly flying by. I'm Steve Smedley, Associate Director here at Acuity. I'd also like to welcome Ian Wright from Disruptive Innovators Network. He'll be reflecting on what we've learned from COVID, the COVID disruption, and how we might build on that to navigate uncertainty going forward.
Steve, and morning colleagues, nice to see you all. Welcome to, well, broadcasting up here in the Northeast from Tier 2, which is very good because I didn't realise we were ever going to get that high again. So, yeah, so Steve's kindly invited me to sort of come along and talk a little bit about the COVID response from within the sector, what that has been like, but mainly to provoke some debate and discussion around what comes next. So I hope this presentation, this is called PowerPoint, it's the future, to keep everybody awake, much better than Zoom, so I will whiz through this at a rate of knots. I've actually brought a colleague along today. Let's see if this works. I'd like you to meet Adam. He's my sort of little digital cohort here.
Hi, I'm Adam, your digital property manager. I can take calls from your tenants, schedule jobs, tell you about your properties, and so much more. Let's get started. Hello, Andrew. I'm Adam. How can I help you?
Hi, Adam. How are you?
I'm great, but I'll be even better if I can help you.
Okay, well, I've got a problem and I need a plumber.
Okay, so what do you need the plumber to do?
Well, there's a leak coming from the sink in the kitchen and it's really driving me mad.
We need to repair the sink because it is leaking?
Yes, that's right.
Anything else?
No, that's all for now, thanks.
Okay, great. When can I send someone over to you?
Can we do Friday?
And at what time?
At around 4 p.m?
Brad will be over on the 10th of August to repair the sink at 4 p.m.
Perfect, thank you.
While taking the call, I used machine learning to find the right worker and schedule an appointment. Even without an app, I can coordinate with Brad and keep you and the tenant informed. By chatting to me, I can tell you about your portfolio, answering your questions about workers or buildings. With my AI brain, I can sit across all of your communication channels, providing a consistent tenant experience. And that's not all. I have apps and dashboards too. I'm so easy to use, you'll be automating your operations in no time. To learn more, contact me at adam@traftis.com.
So I will come back to Adam, your new digital housing manager, a little bit later on, but a little bit about the network, just so you can see the context I'm coming from. I sort of left mainstream work a few years back and set up the Disruptive Innovators Network, having worked in social housing space for 30 odd years. Got to do most of the roles and functions within that, and part of the reason for setting up the network was that actually other sectors and your tenants and residents were being severely sort of disrupted or being innovated with, and I thought actually housing can do with some support in this particular space. So this is what we do. We explore the issues around technology, leadership and culture to hopefully help organisations build better businesses. It doesn't necessarily come in that order. I just thought TLC was a really good acronym. We do lots of stuff online now through the event side. We've got a big leadership series out with the Chartered Institute of Housing at this moment. We're about to build the first digital twin housing association, so we can start to do some scenario testing there in a very safe environment. And we connect with other communities across the world, actually, because housing's problems are not necessarily unique. Got some great free reports on there if you want to go and have a look at them. The Future for Housing IT Services. This is all non-techie stuff, but it again gives you as leaders some context around where business is going. We've got a YouTube channel. There's about 30 leadership interviews on there with a whole variety of characters, so feel free to go and browse those if you wish. We used to do study visits. We can't do them physically anymore, so we will be doing some virtual ones with likes of Amazon and AO.com. We're actually later on today, we're just launching a new specialist network, which is where Adam would fit in. which was the intelligent automation network, looking at digital workforces. And we're going to have a prop tech innovation lab as well. We've had to change the business quite significantly because, again, a lot of it was built on experiential learning, and we're now looking to sort of do more experimental learning through DIN labs. This will be where we will rapidly prototype and test out either technological solutions or some of the business models. So where are we actually at? This slide sums up a lot of the issues for where not just housing is, but where the business world is at this moment in time. And some organisations are streaking ahead and moving on rapidly, others aren't. And what COVID has given us an opportunity, and it has given us an opportunity, is to rethink and explore, right, how can we start to meet these 21st century challenges? Because what we don't want to do as we go back through back to business, whatever that is to start going back to how things were. You'll never get a better chance to sort of have a blank sheet of paper or focus on areas that you can actually, as I think it's referred to now, is build back better. Because some organizations, this is as an example from Amazon. Amazon are one of the partners within the network. This is the Amazon problem solving model. Amazon use this to solve any problem that they work through. And you might look at that and think, well, hang on, how can 5 questions solve any complex problem, or many of the complex problems we end up dealing with? Well, it does, because the focus is very much on the customer. This is one of Jeff Bezos's early sort of foundations that they use, and they keep coming back to the customer. When you work through this, and we do this quite a lot with our members, it's a really effective way of training people to understand and keep customers right at the forefront, but to really understand the problem that you're looking to solve. Because a lot of organizations that I work with are the ones that we've been inside of, or the leaders I've interviewed, they have a look through things through a different lens. If you're looking at this picture, if you haven't recognized it, it's a picture of a brake, the best picture of a brake I could come up with. A lot of people will look at brakes and think, well, actually a brake is something that is to slow me down. It's something to, in case I sort of get into difficulties. Actually, the way that these entrepreneurs and innovators and startups look at brakes is, brakes are there to allow you to go faster. Now, brakes can have two effects. One of the effects during COVID was those organizations where the board were asking for, daily, weekly reports, lots of sort of justification elements within the COVID response. That slowed the executive down. That stopped you doing from what you were actually paid to do, what you needed to do by taking those big corporate decisions. As I say, organizations who look at brakes as an accelerator, they allow you to go faster in the knowledge that actually if things do go off track, you can actually stop and pivot and move on to the other direction. So just a thought to leave you with. Get a lot of organizations who come forward and say, actually, we're really innovative. I think that's great. I think there's a bigger appetite for this now, mainly because a lot of your tenants and residents will actually be experiencing this in their own lives themselves. So a few questions I tend to sort of get in discussions with people around this. Firstly, can you define what innovation looks like to you? Do you practice ethnography, particularly at an executive level? Ethnography is walking in the shoes of your customers. So, how many times in the last 3 months have you walked through an end-to-end problem of one of your residents? So helping you understand the problem that you're trying to solve is quite often one of the hardest bits to do. Organizations, also say, well, actually, yeah, we really value innovation. And my question back to them is, okay, Amazon invests 13, Microsoft 15, Google 25% of their turnover in R&D into innovation. What percentage of your turnover do you invest in that? To be honest, that's probably where the phone starts to go a bit quiet. But also, do you measure the innovations and the income and the savings that are generated by your new products and process? Because if it's value to you, you'll have KPIs and lots of other measures. Do you have? But you've also got to be tracking the technological effects, which can unlock hidden problems. And I gave you an example there at the beginning of a digital worker. Quite often technology is there. We just haven't found ways of being able to utilize it yet. So it's worth keeping an eye on. And that's what we try to do within the network. So we got here, this used to be, I started these sessions back in April, and the COVID response bit was a lot longer than what it is this one slide now. But a couple of things to sort of observe. Firstly, most business continuity plans work. I've not come across any housing provider who has toppled over. That's probably testimony to your training and business simulations and practice runs as to if things did go wrong. I've only had one organisation who actually said they had a global pandemic on their risk register. One had a zombie apocalypse, but again, I think it's all relative, isn't it? One of the things that's come to the fore massively around the COVID response was how much better organisations' communications have improved, both externally to their tenants and residents, but actually also internally. I don't know whether it's the same within the small HJ market, but when we had offices, we assumed that we were in an office, that everybody was communicating and talking about work. That possibly was a bit of an anecdote, and what organisations have done now is actually probably over-communicated so that more people in the organisation know what's going on. And I had some great examples of, again, using lots of different channels, you know, Slack channels or using Teams and things like that, but also chief execs just filming a 5-minute blog on their smartphone at the end of the week saying, this is how I'm feeling, this is what's gone right, this is what's gone wrong, and here's some key messages for the business. And for those DIN members who have undertaken customer satisfaction measurement as well, it's actually gone up. I mean, how long it will stay at that point, I don't know, but the reasons it's gone up, and we've explored them, is actually because the workforce were deployed in a way to say, go and solve customers' problems, and that's what they did. So it was speed over perfectionism. You're obviously probably aware, you know, you've no longer got staff in an office now, and I'll come back to that point. But it has demonstrated an appetite for innovation, and I'm sure in your organisations you've already started to capture them as close to the point of the transaction as possible whilst your memory is fresh, because the key thing here is you need to understand the conditions and the circumstances which enable those innovations to happen if you're going to have any chance of scaling this further across the business. So what comes next? It's not business as usual. This is going to go on for some considerable time. You know, you can see how even the government, with all of its resources and experiences, is having to pivot on a regular basis. This is going to be here 18 months, 2 years at least. So how are our views of the business and operations going to have to change? And your customers and your residents, how are their views going to have to change? And this is the point about, you know, have you got somebody who's capturing the learning? And one of the larger organisations who was a member said that they'd brought in somebody that was on furlough to capture these stories and the lessons that were happening live while they were going through COVID. And I thought that's a really good example, you know, that we're just capturing one pages or some tweets or, again, some video footage from the staff teams, so they can analyse them at a later point, because at some point you're going to want to look back on this and think, wow, how did we achieve everything that we did? So 5 questions for when you're looking to reboot your business. You're probably at the stage, right, what can we start to drop back into the business? What should you drop back into the business is the question I think you should be asking, because, as I've said, you know, you've got a chance to actually start getting rid of some of the stuff that acted as a brake within the business, because some of the conversations I've had around this have identified service areas or you know, even performance measures, some KPIs which haven't added any value or contributed to the business at all. You know, some organizations were, you know, sending out trade operatives to undertake repairs when actually the tenant wasn't paying for those repairs. So this is a chance for you to sit down and think, right, okay, what can we stop doing now so we can focus on what's important? Which you're then left with what you must keep on doing. And then the final point, which is the basis of the next few slides, is what can be delivered differently. So it's a great chance to review organizational purpose. As I say, you know, is everything you're doing guided towards that? You should be reviewing that every 18 months, 2 years anyhow. So I think the organizations who are going to come out with this the quickest and the strongest are the ones who demonstrate these 3 areas here. Agility, the agility that you demonstrated when COVID and lockdown first hit. You know, I've not come across many organizations who weren't able to, you know, rapidly deploy their workforce away from the office. So that's the agility, that flexibility that you demonstrated. So there's some great examples, again, where organizations, where members pulled in people who were going to be furloughed. I think it was from the development team, and actually put them into the customer engagement team, because you needed to do a lot of contact rapidly, and they had the skills to do that. So do you understand what the flexibility of the workforce is? And then we're going to move away from a risk management approach to a resilience management approach. I've got some examples I can share with you about what this actually looks like, but managing the risk is only half of the equation here. It's how quickly the business can get back up and running that is going to be key. And we've seen this in examples of, you know, how the retail sector has responded to some of the issues that we've had. And again, your customers will be experiencing that and therefore will be measuring you against that. On the employee side, you have probably developed your return to work plan. You're looking at remobilization. We're moving into the era of multiple and hybrid workforces. You're going to have organizations who, you know, particularly if you have got offices for people to come into, you're gonna have to split those workforces down, and you're going to have to do an assessment as to, right, okay, well, which roles or which functions can be delivered remotely and which ones need to be delivered within that sort of office collaborative environment. You know, you might have a workforce that comes in on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You might have a workforce that comes in on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, who ironically would be known as the WTF team. Anyhow, on an employee front, you're going to have to be more change absorbent. As I've said, this is going to be here for some considerable time. We're going to have to be prepared for these shocks. This is going to put a lot of pressure on leaders in terms of how you manage this. And it was interesting that I had a conversation with a couple of organizations who this has led on to them reviewing how they're going to develop their teams in the future. Because those who implemented the gold, silver, bronze business continuity planning found that they invested heavily in managers, but when the COVID first struck, they were overwhelmed, particularly frontline managers were overwhelmed by the speed, the intensity and the scale of what it did. And basically that then moved the decision-making back up the chain of the command to the executive, which slowed them down. So now they're sort of pivoting their OD conversation, say, actually, we don't necessarily need managers, we need more leaders. So some of the technological solutions, I think that this is a really interesting discussion point. As at the head of the presentation there, I demonstrated the digital worker. Adam is actually 2 years old. He's quite an old digital worker now. But what was interesting was the difference between how housing responded to the initial lockdown and how other sectors did. So what I mean by this is we ran a session with some guys from the NHS and the health service who had to deploy similar resources and logistics to contact vulnerable customers. Housing is quite rightly very proud of the hundreds of thousands of wellbeing calls that were made, but actually in other sectors, that wasn't what was deployed. It was the likes of Adam and different technologies to actually contact customers who were more than happy to use that form of communication. So therefore, the wellbeing calls were reserved for the those customers who had those needs, who needed that empathetic human voice on the phone. It's the most expensive resource and time resource way of delivering services. So we are going to have to look at this area. The issue around your asset management, how you do remote viewings, because you can't deliver some of the services that we used to in the way that we did. So there's some great technology out there. We work a lot with the startup community. We have some fantastic businesses who would love to work with you, who would love to come in and actually get the benefit of your experience and trial and test and experiment with what they're trying to do. And again, I can send a crib sheet over with some loads of examples on. You can explore this further. But it was interesting, the amount of members now who are deploying, the 360-degree walkthrough cameras. So Void properties come up, same as when you're buying a property now. You can do that for £150 through your Void, through your rental stock. We did a really interesting innovation accelerator lab with a large housing association last year, and what was really interesting was the piece where the chief exec went from horizontal to vertical in less than a second, when this small Dutch company showed a time-lapse video of 28,000 properties to a 90% confidence level in 35 minutes for a full external stock condition survey. He was about to spend $750,000 on a typical inspection survey, and these guys are saying, well, we can run that for 79 pence a property. This is happening in the real estate world outside of housing, so where do we bring that into? I don't think offices are dead. I think their purpose will change. A lot of organizations have got offices and they're going to be worrying about that real estate. I think there's going to be excuse me, quite a bit of repurposing going on. You don't have to think about them as space as a service. This might be the saviour of organisations like WeWork. If you look at what Yvonne Castle's doing up at Johnny Johnson, selling the head office, converting that head office into more accommodation, more stock, she's going to rent office accommodation by the hour as and when her and the teams actually need that. I think it will be a shared collaboration space, because some things, you know, I don't know about you, but I really miss people. So some things you have to actually do in that face-to-face way. Innovation will be one of those ones. You know, if you haven't already started to look at some of your job roles and person specifications, you should be in a position where you can identify those people who are at risk of well-being issues because of their living circumstances or their role, where actually you'd be better off in an office. I love some of the examples that are now starting to emerge around using them as community hubs, because if you think about it, you know, you are quite often at the heart of these communities. I love what Onwards have done with repurposing 2 of their area offices to open them as social supermarkets. So think of them as a small spa where people come to do the shopping. So it's tackling food poverty and food waste. They get the the shopping at 30% of the normal price, and they're in a position where the landlord can, whilst they're in there doing the shopping, have a conversation with them about, you know, their lives, their employability, their rent, whatever it actually might be. And of course, how do your customers want to engage and expect services to deliver? We're about to do an experiment as part of DIN Labs, looking at stop measuring customer satisfaction. It's the wrong measure. It's a lag measure. It's a response to something. It doesn't necessarily help you prioritize. You'd be far better off measuring against customer expectations. But first, you have to understand those customer expectations, and that's what that experiment will help us do. And obviously, you know, this is a time to start to find ways to invest in that research and development. The challenge we have within housing is that it's a sector that's typically now set up for disruption. If you look at the sectors that have been disrupted by the likes of Uber, by the likes of Amazon, they all had some common traits. Lots of incumbent suppliers, legacy IT systems, little or no competition. Housing, you know, fits that basket really, really well. The only thing that will drive change, if it's not legislative change, and you've got to bear in mind regulation and legislation is a lag measure, a lag response to something, is going to be you. So, last couple of slides. These are some of the key learners. These are the ones I think are keeping leaders awake at night. You know, stop using the phrase, you know, staff are working from home. They're not. They're at home trying to work. There is a big difference. After 6 months sitting at the kitchen table on a kitchen chair, the fun's probably gone out of you know, the thrill of sort of working from home there. So that's going to be an issue for organisations and leaders, because we've now got this always on culture, which is toxic. So if you think about the commute was your buffer between work and home. You had a commute, you worked, you left the office, you had a commute, you watched videos, you listened to music, you did Sudoku, whatever it was, so that by the time you walked in through your front door, you were in home mode. So what are we now doing to tackle that? Actually, you know, home is work, work is home, because it is going to have massive implications for personal and team well-being. If I was to ask you, how are you currently measuring personal and team well-being? I've not had many positive responses to say, yeah, actually we've got the data on that. We know how these teams are performing and how they're feeling. I think team well-being and personal well-being is going to be one of those skills we're going to have to train in our future leaders, because visual management is dead. We don't need managers being in the office to make sure people are sat at their desks working, or whatever it is that we're doing. We're not going back to that. So you're going to have to deploy workplace and people analytics to understand how the work is getting done, because you don't at this moment in time. The other issue was around speed. We've had an experience of operating at corona speed. You know, very much like the retail, my clients in the retail space, you know, their view is, well, actually, you know, this is how we operate. You know, I was speaking with one of the directors from Sainsbury's, and he said, well, yeah, you know, it was a big shock, but ultimately, you know, this is what we're used to. We operate on 2 to 3 to 5% margins, so we have to be really tight. We have to be really responsive and agile. Question back to housing organisations is it desirable and is it possible to maintain working at this speed? The kind of speed that you worked at when you were moving people out of your office environments and getting them to work remotely? Because there's no doubt some people will think, actually, I don't want to go back to having, massively long projects. I want to be able to work at this speed, because we're very much now in the low touch, no touch economy. You can't go into customers' homes. You can't send staff into customers' homes. So what is your low touch, no touch strategy going to look like? We've got another lab project kicking off at the beginning of November, looking at using AR, augmented reality, and video for self-diagnosis of repairs and operative training. So a company called Sitecall, I had an experience of it the other month. We had some broadband issues. They texted me a link to my smartphone. I clicked on the link, that gave them access to the camera. I was then able to show them the router. They drew on the screen and said, plug this cable into that port there. Problem solved. I was a very happy customer. I got it solved in minutes. I didn't have to wait for an engineer out. Satisfaction was high. So how do we deploy these technologies within that space? What does it look like? But one of the big challenges we are going to face is around vulnerable customers and how we redefine what their experience is like. I don't know about you, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the examples I've seen so far on some of the housing management systems are actually we've ticked a box, this customer is vulnerable. No details. I think we need to ask some very serious questions around, well, okay, who defined them as vulnerable as a starting point? Was that self-defined? Was that medically defined? Was that housing officer defined? Is that condition permanent, temporary? Does it come and go? Is it seasonal? What is the level of that vulnerability? So somebody who's had an asthma inhaler prescription 4 years ago is very different to somebody who's completely housebound. So how do we then look to personalize and tailor services to them? Final slide, and try to finish on some positives here. You've got a great opportunity. Housing is a brilliant sector. You run brilliant businesses. You've got fantastic problems. And that means you can attract talent. And now that we are working in the virtual world, you can attract people from anywhere to work on some of your issues. You are no longer restricted. And this is probably the biggest gift to small AHAs in terms of you can afford to access people with more experience and more qualifications than you ever could before. The world is your talent pool. I've got members now who are actively looking outside of their travel to work area to say, well, actually, we don't need to recruit people from our local geography. We can go to Europe, we can go to America, wherever it is. So think of those projects that you can get kick-started with this sort of talent. Lots of organizations have been recruiting, continued to recruit at all levels, and some people have never met some of their new colleagues. So how do you get across the culture of your organization when you're onboarding people in a remote world? Again, as part of the Write Your Own Future series, this is something we'll be looking at in terms of how can you deliver the culture, because that's really important to you as to how the way people deliver services. But you'll also have half an eye on what's coming next to the future, and you've got an opportunity here. You will have seen what the skills deficits were that you had during COVID and what the future ones are going to be. I'll give you an example. The best responses I've seen during COVID and during lockdown were the ones where local community activists or people who got together and set up WhatsApp groups, knocked on vulnerable people's doors and said, do you want some shopping? Do you need any help? They've used all of these sort of channels. So you're now in a position whereby you can tap into this new community activism and say, look, as a housing provider, we don't want to come in and take over this, but you're probably going to want to get back to your own world and your own life. How can we help support you, maintain this sense of community that's built up over the last 6 months? So there's some examples there. These probably won't be available to any individual small housing association, but what you guys have got by coming together and working with the likes of Acuity is you've got the ability to scale. So you might not need somebody full-time, but you have got the opportunity to say, well, actually, 1 day a month, we want a really senior IT director to help us. And you're also going to have pull on demand. You're going to have variety of demand from your customers, because that's going to have changed as a result of their experiences during COVID. And you're certainly going to have variety of demand from your colleagues and employees, because if you think about it, I don't know whether you read that report a couple of weeks back from a group of housing associations who'd researched their staff in terms of how they were feeling. They identified that they had a 4% real terms pay increase as a result, because they're not having to buy a season ticket, they're not having to travel, their quality of life has improved, they're able to see their family more, they're in a position whereby, you know, the carbon footprint's reduced because of the travel, and actually, you know, apart from wanting to come in maybe 1 or 2 days a week, they're quite happy to have this flexibility. So you'll be in a position where somebody who's got, say, a young family can now spend time with them, they can have tea with them, put them to bed, and they can log on and do work from 7 till 9 at night. Again, the Yvonne Castle example, she's now issuing lifestyle contracts to her team. So basically, depending on where you're at within your career and your personal circumstances, your lifestyle contract will change as you move through the business. And a really good test for you guys looking at the business of the future is around heritage versus baggage. This is your chance to sit down and say, right, what is the heritage? This is the way that people talk about your brand. This is the way that people actually think about and, you know, project your business. So what makes you who you are? This is the stuff that you want to amplify, and particularly post-COVID. I think the other side of that is, right, what's your baggage? You will never, ever get a better time to, you know, scrape off some of the barnacles of the corporate hull of your business that's stopping you from doing things. You know, there'll be stuff that you just thought, actually, we've never needed this, so why are we doing this? It might just be such simple things like, you know, some of your performance measures, stop doing them, you know, or stop doing them for a while and see if anybody notices, because there's no doubt in my mind we've got many futures coming up, and those many futures are going to be around working in a very, very short time span. You're not going to be able to plan with any sense of certainty anything beyond the next 12 to 18 months. So you're going to work in 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12, 12 to 18 months. It was described to me as being a bit like a game of Jenga, you know, Jenga, where you've got the blocks. You take one block out, you're then going to have to sit back and assess, right, okay, well, where do I take the next one from? And it's the same with regard to housing organizations. You won't have the data, you won't have the insight, you won't have the knowledge and intelligence to take informed decisions. You can guess, but the chances are you'll be wrong. So, you know, my, you know, last comment is, you know, don't worry about that. Everybody's in the same boat. We've never been here before. There are no consultants, advisors, frameworks, or anything that will be able to guide you through the COVID situation. So what you do is right for you. By all means, you know, look to others and see what they're doing, but in a lot of cases, you can write your own future. And I will stop sharing there, because most of this now is about discussion with you guys. So I hope that was useful. I hope that resonated, and happy to be challenged, happy to be asked for more detail. Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. That was pretty amazing, actually. There's so much to think about. It's almost bewildering. But whilst people are coming up with their questions, I mean, if people can just use the Q&A function, as I said, to flag if they've got any issues, I think I've worked out the functionality. Because of the nature of this specific webinar, I think it would be great if you could flag up if you've got a question. But then what I'm going to do is allow you to talk, so we can get a bit of a conversation going with Ian. So if you have got a question, flag it up on the Q&A, and then I'll invite you to talk, so that we can sort of debate it a bit. Just whilst I'm waiting for those questions to come in, Ian, you said that some of these solutions, some of the opportunity here is definitely scalable for smaller housing associations. Obviously, we've got some very dinky associations. We've got some that are quite big by our standards, like, you know, 500 properties, 800 properties, that kind of thing. Can you just say a little bit more about how you think smaller associations can run with some of what you're saying, and particularly sort of around, you know, how far they can take the tech, how far they can get stuck into innovation and capturing learning, given they haven't got quite so many resources?
Well, again, I'll ask two points to answer that, Steve. I mean, first of all, it's the way that we look at the way that we run business now. So I think I gave some examples during the presentation of how startups and some of the disruptive businesses that have come in to our world have actually started to disrupt us. Now, they realise that actually a lot of the legacy systems that we've used have been like that brake I showed you earlier on. You know, they're slowing the business down because they're not responding. What you guys could do coming together, and I think you've got over 100 members within the Acuity sort of family, is, you know, you've probably all got similar problems. You don't all need to be working on them at the same time, because what I used to see within housing was there was a lot of reinvention of the wheel. A lot of those wheels were square. So why would you invest in something like that? So one of the ways that we're looking to sort of tackle that is to provide that safe space whereby organizations can crowdfund to say, look, actually, we've got a common area here that would normally cost us, I don't know, 20, 30,000. Tell you what, we'll put in 2,000 or 3,000 each, and we'll share the findings and the knowledge that comes from that. There are tech companies out there, there are service provider companies who would love the chance to work with you, because again, if it works within, you know, 2 or 3 of the organizations, chances are it'll work across the whole community. So once that proof of concept has been tried out and tested, you can then start to roll that out to organizations. And once you start to get those transactions at a scale, the price absolutely plummets. So if you think about the deployment of, say, those digital workers that I demonstrated, last year we built a digital rent arrears officer to a proof of concept level in 24 hours. So this is somebody who actually will undertake all of the repetitive tasks that housing officers or rent officers would normally do, sending out letter 1, letter 2, whatever it is. Not the complex cases, but what it does do, it frees people up to do those complex cases in the empathetic areas. And consequently, you then provide an enhanced service for sort of less cost around that. So, I mean, I'm sure there would be, some of the startup community who would love to have a conversation to say, well, actually, can we come and try some of this stuff across your assets or across your people side? There's a great startup company called TellJoe who do a lot of the vulnerability assessments for housing providers to allow you to start to personalize those services. You know, they're a great organization that looks at. There's an organization called Beam who are tackling homelessness, and they do that through crowdfunding. So basically you can personally sponsor somebody, and the technology is working really, really well. My question is, why is a fintech company or people from working in fintech and the financial services side wanted to come in and start to help solve some of the homelessness problems? You know, my view is, well, actually, you guys at Beam, you should be working with housing providers who've got the knowledge and the understanding and the experience on the ground. So there are lots of different ways of doing it, Steve. I think a really good example, particularly around well-being, that I came across was obviously staff are now working remotely. You want to make sure you're looking after them. 3 of my members now have recruited an online personal trainer. He does. It costs him just over £100 a week, and he runs online Zoom sessions for 15, 20 members of staff. Some of them actually switch the cameras on as well. But basically the whole point around this was they're getting fit, they're getting that sense of community that they would have had when they were in the office. But what was even better was when I mentioned that to one of my members, and they said, well, actually, we're doing something even closer to us. One of our contact center operatives is a qualified PT instructor. She is running the sessions for the organization now. So, you know, quite often if you ask what skills have we got within the business to help with some of these things, you will find people who can do that. I mentioned to you about a lot of organizations now do YouTube videos on how do I is one of the companies who prepare them. So they'll do videos for tenants to self-serve and self-repair, how to fix a latch, change a fuse, change a light bulb, all of those things. Again, I mentioned that to one of my members, they said, actually, we're doing better than that. We've got a trade operative who loves being on video on his camera. He's recorded them himself on his smartphone and uploaded them to the community Facebook page. So this was something that didn't cost anything, but has a high value. So there's lots of different ways of looking at the way we currently run services to say we can run them better. Right, there we go. I think I've waffled on there now. I think we've got some questions.
Yeah, I have, but I'd just like to just quickly pick up on some of that. So, because one of the problems that I think that we've had in the sector is really getting some meaningful collaboration going across housing associations. Because even with some of the small ones, it seems difficult to. It seems like a great idea, but there are so many different obstacles to actually overcome. But it seems to me that there could be this could be a new way of cracking the nut, as it were. Are we saying that an organisation like yourself that serves as this intermediary between sectors could almost like serve as a conduit for, say, a bunch of small associations getting together and then getting together with tech companies to try out something in quite an affordable way around a shared issue? Is that a possibility?
It is. Let me give you an example. To your opening point, Apple, who we've been into Apple's headquarters a few times now, Apple have a saying that any idiot can add in complexity into a process or a system, but it takes a genius to take that out, right? And they focus on removing complexity from everything they do. So any of you guys out there who have, an Apple product, I would ask you, well, how many times have you had to read the Apple manual to get that product working? You haven't. It's because they want to make everything really seamless and frictionless. So you dive in knowing that actually I can't really break this, and it's a discovery piece of learning. And that's what I'm trying to sort of do with bringing organizations together now. It's a discovery learning piece. So risk shared is a much better way of actually doing that, rather than everybody trying to do things on their own. I mean, we've had a conversation a few years back about when social enterprise was absolutely at the forefront of housing leaders' minds. Everybody wanted a community cafe, an employment hub, things like that. And they failed, didn't make money, lost money, and crashed and burned after a short while. And the reason for that is housing is very good at being a landlord, of providing the support services, doing the the rents, the lets, and all of that sort of stuff. What they should have done was collaborated with those organisations who were brilliant at running social enterprises. And it's the same in this space. There are some brilliant innovators out there who want to, particularly startups, and startups have a peculiar mentality. Startups look at the world through, if we see something as a blockage or a barrier, their mindset is, right, okay, it's a problem. How do we get over it, under it, through it, round it, right? And it is, it's something they practice and work on. There's lots of different ways of sort of doing it, but I do think the collaborative approach of bringing organizations and talent together has to be worth looking. You could run something through Acuity in terms of, managing a project, take a common problem, agree on what it is that you're looking for, and then run a 10 or 12 week lab to see, can you get that to a proof of concept stage? And these things needn't cost a huge amount of money. It's more likely to be a pull on your resources, but you should be spending this money or this time, in my view.
Okay, thanks for that, Ian. Yes, Anne's got a couple of questions. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a go and allow you to talk, Anne, so you can have a proper conversation. Right, Anne, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, I've put three things in the Q&A, so at the risk of hogging the whole session.
Go for it.
First of all, how does the network work? How do we join up to keep being inspired? That's the first question. We are a small social housing provider, but with a big chunk of our operations are care related. So we're a social care organisation as well. And so of our 95 staff, about 60 of them are working effectively on the front line in care. So you've given us some great examples from housing. But what have you got from care? And I like Steve's suggestion or some thoughts around whether Acuity has some sort of group or network working on innovation, because we've seen our use of IT trends, quick apply forms, interactions, being able to recognise stuff more quickly since we've had a part-time CIO, which has been really good. And that's everything for me so far till I can think of something else. You can mute me now, Steve.
Okay. Thanks, Anne.
Okay, thanks, Anne. I mean, I won't do a sell on the network. You can go and have a look at our website. There's loads of free content on there, and I can if you drop me a line through the website, I can send you more details. In terms of the care side, it's really interesting. Two of the technological companies I think are worth looking at. One's called Alcove, your Alcove, and the other one's called Howz, HOWZ. They're two that we've worked with over the last few years, particularly using some technologies to, again, probably cover off some of the low touch, no touch economy side, some of the sensor stuff. It works really, really well. It's been well proven. We're also on the DIN Labs going to be doing some work with a Dutch social care provider called Bertog. If you've not come across them, they're a 10,000 person social care business in the Netherlands. They have a head office or support function of 50. They're looking to get that down to 30. Their business model is predicated on the Jeff Bezos leadership model, which is team model, which is if it takes more than 2 pizzas to feed a team, your team is too big, you won't get the decision making, and it'll slow everything down. So we're going to do a sprint with them to see whether the Bertog model would transfer across over here into the UK. It's all about self-managing teams. I think that's worth looking at. Another good example that might be worth having a look at is what Viva are doing around persona-based procurement. Procurement is quite often seen as a barrier to startup community and new market entrants coming in because they don't necessarily have the track record and the financials to scale their product. I love what Viva did. I think storytelling is going to be a skill we're going to train people in the future. They went out and spoke to their residents who had some particular issues in social care, went out and spoke to them, and gathered their issues, gathered their problems, and then wrote it up in amalgamated into a story called Mary's Story. It was 3 pages. They sent that Mary's Story around to 3 of their social care providers and said, who would like to keyword collaborate with us to help us solve Mary's problems? 2 of them came back with a fairly traditional response. The third one came back and says, wow, we would love to collaborate with you and help you solve Mary's problems. We don't know how we'll do that yet, but this is what skills we've got. This is what you've got. Let's work on this and let's see what we can actually do together. And that's what we're seeing in other sectors now, because COVID, opportunities pass, they don't pause. And I'm seeing lots of examples of other sectors whereby traditional competitors are coming together to share the way that they can do things. They realize now there's no point in spending money doing lots of things on our own. So I do think collaboration will be good. So another good example around the care stuff is have a look at a company called Together All. I really like what they're doing. Again, they're massively expanding in the universities, higher education, and health sectors. And basically, it's a 24/7 online wellbeing portal. So if somebody is at danger or at risk of having wellbeing issues as a result of COVID or the way that they're working, this provides some really innovative support. And again, you purchase it in the same way you would buy Netflix or Sky. It's a solutions as a service model. So you pay for what you need. You scale up and down depending on what your circumstances are. So you're not paying for something that you don't need. There are other examples I can share, but I hope that was give you some insights.
No, thanks a lot for that, Ian. And yeah, as far as Anne's third point was concerned, I think me and Mark can go away and perhaps even have a chat with Anne and perhaps have a chat with some of our other members about trying to look at some kind of innovation lab kind of idea, because I know we're up for rebooting the service anyway, so I think we should stir fry that one in the strategy wok and see if anybody salutes it, or whatever the terminology is. I'll bring Jayatika in if I need to, but you can probably see the question there, Ian. It's about just getting a bit more info from you about workplace analytics, because they've only got 5 people and they've been working from home. It's all worked out brilliantly. It would be just good to understand a little bit more about how those analytics work and what the benefits are.
Really good question. This is a toughie for leaders, because you're now not in a position to understand how the work now gets done. you are going to have to deploy some way of remotely, getting back data around that. Now, the example I would give is that if you're on the Microsoft sort of platform, every Microsoft employee has a dashboard on their PC or laptop. On that dashboard, it shows a number of indicators. It shows what time they logged on, how long they've been working for, who they've been collaborating with, and what they've been working on. It uses the RAG rating to highlight any issues for their managers as to whether this person is at risk or has some potential issues that they need to be aware about. So, for example, if they've been working 60-hour weeks as opposed to the contracted 40, or they've been logging on very late at night working into the early hours. These are all things that managers you need to be aware of because you have a duty of care and responsibility. On the other side, how many of you would like to actually have a dashboard, or your employees would like to have a dashboard showing them exactly what they've been working on? This is something that we're going to have to work through. There's a great technological company called Temporal who do a lot of people analytics using your various different IT systems that actually will start to make some of the stuff that's invisible now visible, so you can see how the work is starting to get done. But I think the key thing here is to remember that in crisis management is top down. What you guys did as leaders during the initial COVID was basically you took decisions very, very quickly because you had to. Crisis recovery is going to be bottom up. So things like workplace analytics and understand how the work gets done, you're going to have to do in consultation and partnership with the people as to what is right for your culture and your organization. So I hope that helps.
All right, thanks for that, Ian. Anne's got back to us to say that they've already have e-meds and e-care plans. Maureen seems to, we haven't even got the innovation lab. We're just discussing it as an idea, but she's actually got a project for us already, the first project for that innovation lab. Which is, this is a debate going on in the Southwest Club about smaller associations kind of developing an app, a tenant portal. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on coming up, the latest thinking in terms of tenant portals, how they might work and how they might work for smaller organisations.
Well, I mean, your first starting point is to practice that ethnography piece, which is actually walking in your customer's shoes. I mean, a lot of the small housing providers are very specialist. You have highly honed skills in particular areas, so you're not mainstream. So you're tending to deal with customers who have complex or deep-seated needs around that. So you have to do that walking with customers piece to understand what that would look like, because we like to sort of make assumptions about how customers will engage with us, but you can't beat getting that data. So you have to put the hard yards in there first of all. But there are lots of different ways of getting that insight and data. I'll give you some examples from Amazon and Microsoft, how they went about it. So, sorry, Apple. So if you go into an Apple store, most of you have probably been into an Apple store. What do you not see when you first go in there? There's no signage up. And the reason for that is very, very clear. And let me explain that. You go into the first part of the Apple store. The Apple store is the red zone. You're met by somebody. They're the greeters. And the first point to is, how can I help you today? What problem have you got? This is their data collection point. This is where they're collecting the data and the insight as to the problems that they're having with Apple products, which then gets passed through the system, so that actually before most people even think know that they've got a problem, you're getting a new product or a new solution 2 or 3 times a year, right? So what is housing's equivalent of that in terms of understanding what the problems are? I mean, it was interesting. We did a study, our last study visit was to the Microsoft store in Oxford Street. And again, it's very similar setup to Apple. And what they wanted, and again, this is counterintuitive to what some housing providers have done, which is we've spent the last few years getting people to self-serve. Amazon's view is, no, we want you to come in, we want you to have an increased dwell time, we want you to spend time in the store because we want to have a conversation with you. By having a conversation with you, we capture your stories, and therefore we know what problems you've got, and we can then design solutions to them. It was interesting when they advertised for a community engagement manager to go out and do Microsoft stuff within the community. Who did they employ? They employed the resident engagement manager from Peabody. because Microsoft knew that housing were very good at community engagement. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we do really well that other sectors and other businesses will sort of nick from us. But I think, you know, understanding, we often make the assumption that tenants are not necessarily digitally literate. I think with the take-up of smartphone technology and things like that, they are way more literate than what we give them credit for. So whether that's a portal, whether that's a phone, contact center, you know, whether it's a letter, I think you've got to understand your customers better to then personalize how they like to be contacted.
Thanks for that, Ian. Now, we were scheduled to go over the hour, as long as an hour and 15 minutes if people have got their questions. So if you have got any more questions, let's get them in. Oh, it's Anne again. Can you see that, Ian? So Anne's issue is, one problem I can solve in care is sorting out problems with the 20 or so different training courses people do, but understanding what the problem is. So yeah, I think what she's trying to say is, yeah, identifying the problem is, is absolutely key.
And that's, Steve, that's where the Amazon 5 questions, working backwards from the customer, is powerful. You know, you go through that and you keep coming back to the customer. I mean, I'm sure that this might be something we could run with yourselves at a future session. Is I'm sure we could get a sort of one of the guys from Amazon to come in and talk through their problem-solving model.
It would be interesting. How different is that from systems thinking? Because the ethnography thing and systems thinking, they might be different vintages, but it's probably the same thing going on behind.
There's a lot of that. I mean, the big trend at the moment, Steve, within the sector is around human-centered design. So, you know, if you've bought shares in Post-it notes, then you're probably laughing at this moment in time. But, you know, basically just plotting out the customer journey as it goes through. And I think that's a really good skill to have within the organization, to understand that. So it's variations on a theme around that. But, you know, I'm sure we could see whether, you know, one of these sessions early in the new year, I could maybe get somebody from Amazon to come in and run through the problem-solving model and share with them how they do that. Because again, there's a lot of tools that these organizations use to think differently, that challenge a lot of the conceptions around us. So Amazon spend a minute looking at somebody's CV. They spend far longer looking at whether this person can write. The skills that they really value most are the written word, because part of what they've got to do with that problem-solving piece is they start with the press release. So you've got to write the press release. If you're coming with any solution, you've got to write the press release to the customer as to how that will actually work. And they're brutal around that. So they really value people who can have those writing skills. And sometimes we forget those sort of things.
Right, well, that sounds good. I think we might take you up on that. It sounds like a future webinar or whatever. Angela in the West Country's got back to us just to make a comment, I think, saying, yeah, people are digitally savvy. They don't always have the resources to pay for what we all take for granted, and that they're working on this now. It's a systematic issue that I think probably all of us need to respond to. Maureen's come up with another one. She's very interested in running through mapping customer journeys, saying, yeah, we need a paradigm shift. Well, yeah, I seem to remember from my post-grad study that bureaucracies will never change their paradigms. And I think sometimes you can even have very small organizations that almost mimic bureaucracies. Sometimes you just need, I don't know, something like disruption, perhaps, to actually change your paradigm for you rather than you consciously doing it. So yes, I think we'd probably be up for that customer journey stuff as well. I've just got a quick question for you, Ian. Going back to Adam, as it were, not biblically, but your digital helper. God, did I sort of sound vaguely like Alan Partridge then, with that qualification? Dear me, oh God, I don't know. How far do you think that kind of tech can go? Because I remember when I was trying to reconfigure services at London Borough and Newham back in the late noughties. And we were talking about dividing housing inquiries up into transactional and what were relationships, which I think you qualified as being where you need to hear that human voice, where you need a human thinking around a problem and not just solving a transaction. So where do you think the split is between what Adam can do and when a person has to kick in?
Well, again, a lot of that comes back to understanding your customers and your level of personalisation that people are comfortable with. If I give you some examples of when we built that rent arrears officer in 24 hours, a digital worker like that is getting so advanced now. There are basically two categories of digital work. You can get one which costs about £7,000. You can get another one which is around just under the £20,000 mark. They can do the equivalent work of a ratio of about 7 to 8 humans. So for £20,000, you can get 7 or 8 digital workers. They log on, they work, they go where they're told in exactly the same way as human employees, but they don't get tired, they don't make mistakes, and they're very, very good at the repetitive, boring stuff that actually we don't need to do this anymore now. So, you probably, your tenants and residents and yourselves, you will have been chatting to some of the chatbots that some of the service providers you buy services from. And I promise you, some of them are absolutely indistinguishable now from human beings. And the rate of their development is going to be exponential. I could show you some examples of some of the ones that are coming through now, and it is incredibly clever how they're doing. But the beauty about this is you've got access to stuff that these guys want to get involved with. So if you wanted to test out some of these areas, you could do it very, very easily. Another area that might be worth looking at is the low code, no code technological stuff. So, there are companies out there. We've done some work with someone who will basically write you an app in a matter of a few hours. So if you want an app for your residents to actually get in touch with you or to provide some services for, you can literally get it written in a few short hours. People can get trained within the business. Doesn't matter what your size is, or even if you've got technical skills, there are companies that will actually provide this for you. So if you see something and actually you think, let's test an app, you can do it literally for a few hundred or a couple of £1,000s. And again, what I think COVID gives you a chance to do is to think about things and say, right, how can we experiment in some of these areas? Because failure is I think is going to be a key skill we're going to be training leaders in the future. Because the next session I'm jumping on in a few minutes is about why do so many transformation projects fail. Over 73% of digital transformation projects fail or fail to achieve the outcomes. You've got to think, wow, that's a really tall failure rate. But as long as the organisation and the people involved are learning from that, to me, that's an investment, because that stops you going off and doing other things. So, we could talk about transformation. That's a whole other session, but I hope that's been of some use, guys.
Yep. Ian, thanks so much for that. I think people are going to have so much to think about. And I think the other thing that was really useful about it is, as smaller housing organisations, I think many feel that they're excluded from some of this stuff because it's a preserve of bigger organisations with more resources. So I think you've given us all ideas about how we can get together and explore some of this stuff. So yes, we'd like you back at some point in the future, Ian, and we'll talk about some of those other issues, with or without Apple, I think. I'd also like to say thanks to everybody who's listened in. Thanks for that. And to quote Ian, I think you need to go back to your organisations and scrape the barnacles off your corporate hulls. Lots more of these webinars on our website. Go check it out and get yourself booked on. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you guys, bye.